in this community for various reasons. And if you're just tuning in, you're listening to Reverend Art Gordon, who's the pastor of St. John's Missionary Baptist Church, and Kevin Peterson from the New Democracy Coalition. And I'm your host, Darnell Williams, as the president and CEO of the Urban League of Eastern Massachusetts. We had a great time in Memphis, but we were talking about some southern experiences in Georgia from Reverend Art Gordon, and he playing football, and he was singing some very salient but insightful knowledge in terms of his football experiences and how and why the Patriots have one of the best playbooks in the business, because they can take an average player and turn him into a world-class Pro Bowler. But there's got to be some symmetry of, if we can do that on the gridiron, why can't we do that in churches or in our communities or et cetera? What would you say about that?
I think that comes to a lot of issues dealing with power, different personalities, and a lack of focus. And if I can tie that team mission to a historical moment, I've been reading Dr. King's Stride Towards Freedom,
yes,
the Montgomery story. And when you read it, you can't help but be moved, because you see how 50,000 African Americans in 1955 and 1956 in Montgomery, Alabama.
66 days later.
Exactly. Working together, saying we will not ride the bus.
That's right.
And they did that for over a year.
They changed the transportation system across this nation because they were unified. Unified.
So there was no who's got the most money. It was all, look, I'm working together. This person's going to drive these people. This church is going to help out in this way. This man or this woman is going to do these certain things. And because of that unification, there was a certain power in that was able to bring about change that not only started in Montgomery, but continued for the next 13 years throughout the Civil Rights Movement and even beyond. And for me, that's the correlation between the whole team ethic of starting in the locker room.
Kevin, that we used to occupy the high moral ground. And Art, Reverend Gordon, is it okay if I call you Art or Reverend Gordon?
Either is fine.
Okay, well, in this setting, let's just go with Art.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of words.
Too many
Art,
titles.
but I want to make sure your title
Yes,
is very
sir.
much
Yes, sir.
is due its reverence. But Art has just given us a great example of the high moral ground that we occupied during that march or the Montgomery bus boycott. How would you? What would be your take on that in terms of the unification as we had the high moral ground back during those days, and do we still have it?
I think Art is correct. There was a certain grandeur and high moral accounting that the people in that area, led by Dr. King and others, Rosa Parks, as they were articulating what it meant to be a child of God and what it meant to be a citizen. I don't think we've lost it. I think that the country has become more complicated in some ways. Some of the freedoms that the African American community have gained have made the community a little more complex and somewhat, I wouldn't say divided, but distracted.
I'm going to push back on that in a moment, but go ahead.
That's what this conversation is about. I enjoy it. Well, I like coming on your show. I think there is still, the African American in this country still has a high moment and much to deliver. We see just this past week in the city of Philadelphia, 2 black men arrested because they were simply sitting, waiting for a business meeting. Didn't look the way that they should have looked in terms of the white gaze. So they were arrested. But here comes citizens of Philadelphia, white and black, but mostly led by blacks, challenge the spirit of the moment, which was oppressive. And it's beginning to do something in Philadelphia. And in fact, it's doing something in the country. Starbucks yesterday said that they will close 8,000 stores across the country for racial sensitivity training. Not only that, they will engage in a process of contacting entrepreneurs across the country who are African American, who want to find work, who want to do leadership, so that they make the country better. There's an instance right there 50 years after the assassination of Dr. King, or Dr. King's final speech, there are instances, and this was one just this past week in Philadelphia, where the African American community rises up, calls the country towards moral duty and moral responsibility, spirituality, and it's a good moment for the country.
I say that it is, as Art said earlier, the 365 days, the 366 days in Montgomery.
84, I believe.
384, you're right. The key is that there was the moral element of their behavior and their actions and their solidification.
Sure.
But at the end of their day, it was about the economic impact that it had on the company in terms of the bus company, because they were losing folks who were being terminated from their jobs, evicted from their homes. They will walk, they said, my feet may be tired, but my soul is inspired. And now we look at where you just gave us an example. Now Starbucks is just being smart. Imagine all the black folks who buy coffee and all the other items in Starbucks if they had not responded.
Well, I want to take them. I want to take them at their confession.
Economic impact. Is
Well,
at
no,
the end
no,
of the
no.
day.
Well,
That's all I'm
you
saying.
can, but I want to
I'm
take
not
them.
saying they're not separated.
I want to take them at their confession. Their confession is that they felt bad, that these people were treated badly. Now
I agree with that.
There's an end game in terms of economics, but we've seen so many instances around the country where businesses are discriminated against African American people,
Absolutely.
and they said, well, we're going to have a diversity program. Oh, we're going to have more sensitivity training, and it turns out to be nothing. Here is a moment where I think two white leaders in this country stepped up to the plate, heard the moment, felt the moment, and responded. I want to account to that as a spiritual moment and not necessarily one of economic calculus.
I would say that there's a combination of both, and I don't think that one should be demonized or one should be sanctioned. I just think it's a combination thereof, and I think it's a good thing, and it's a good movement. And so I don't want us to lose sight of it, because we still got issues. We got the shooting that's in Sacramento that did not turn out to be an economic. We got folks from Minnesota that are having challenges.
We have Boston, where African American teachers aren't hired at the appropriate level according to a court decree. We have an issue at Faneuil Hall, where people across the city are saying that the building sort of represents symbolically a vestige of racism. There are issues here across in Boston, as there are issues across the country. And I think that the Starbucks
it's an example. It could be a prototype.
Yes, absolutely.
It's a prototype and a moment to say that there is a step forward. But why do black folks always have to be the prototype of example?
That's because if you look at the history, and I'm being serious about this, black folks have been the spiritual leaders in this country. You know.
That's not a question. My look at you is that that's an acknowledgement of that powerful statement that you just made.
Yeah, I mean, you go back to the point from which they were identified as three-fifths of a human being. There has been, I wouldn't say, I know it's Sunday morning, so I'll say there's been a certain mark on black people.
Well,
in terms of
Sunday morning,
in
we
this
want
country.
to keep it real as well, because what we want to do, Rev, is that we want to make sure.
He's Rev.
Well, all of us. Now he's a pastor, and he has been called by
I'm revved
God,
up.
And you're revved up.
Rev and rev up.
But all of us have an anointing of being a servant of the Most High God.
That's true.
And
That's
so
true.
regardless, so our pulpits are just different.
But I mean this very seriously. Du Bois talks about the African American having a certain mark, a certain spiritual calling in this country, and it's true. I mean, you look throughout the 400 years that we've been here, as the African American, in one way or another, through its arts and culture, through its rhetorical leadership, its preaching, through building institutions like.
Don't forget jazz. Please don't forget
jazz.
The creation, American born.
There's always been this, as strange as it may seem, this thing about the black in this country that has led to the continuing renewal and development spiritually, economically, and politically in this country.
So, Rev, we have been, we went away.
Rev Peterson.
You said you were revved up.
I think he likes that title, Rev.
I know, but he's got to get that M there first. we really, this is transcendent
Mhm.
from talking about ourselves individually, but really talking about us as a people. You started it when you talked about the team concept.
Mhm.
So put it into historical terms from your pastoral lens of, and this is what I was challenging Kevin on, is that the combination of economics and civil rights
Mhm.
has really ushered us into a new era
Mhm.
of a ground that we thought that we had covered.
Mhm.
So tell us now, based on you kind of like what you experienced in terms of Memphis,
Mhm.
what did it do to galvanize you spiritually, and what did you say to your congregation after your return from Memphis?
For me, being in Memphis was a spiritual moment. 50 years from the assassination of Dr. King, and for me, it was spiritual in many ways because it reminded me of the work I'm called to do, the charge to keep I have, as Scripture says, and that as people of God, as Christians, as Black people, that there's still a lot of work, but it's going to take us working together. It's going to take us speaking up and speaking out. It's going to take for us to put our money in Black-owned banks and Black businesses. It's going to take for us as churches to invest our money in different areas, to invest our money more in the community, and it's going to really take us to look at ourselves and say, what can we do to make our communities, our churches better? And there are a number of different ways we can do that. And so I was really encouraged by my time in Memphis, seeing Black people from all across the country,
Oh my gosh, wasn't that
from
powerful?
different backgrounds,
Oh my gosh.
all in one location, with one mission of knowing that, as you mentioned earlier, we all have different pulpits, whether it's as an executive director or whether it's as a teacher or a professor. And the question I always try to pose to my congregation is, what are you doing to make lives for Black people better? What are you doing to call out racism, to call out sexism, to call out all these other isms and problems that are a huge challenge and burden to Black people today in America?
Kevin, we went from Stokely Carmichael, say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud, to Black Lives Matter. We got the OGs and we got the millennials in the room. How do we keep them connected, saying that I have something related to what you're doing? Because sometimes it seems we think like we're divided and we're on a different page. Help me and the listening audience understand that this is a continuation of that same movement.
Yeah, I think it's about continuing the continuation of teaching each other, engaging each other in conversations and dialogues, and talking about our collective stories over time. Black Lives Matter it would essentially be disconnected if it didn't know what Black Power, the Meredith March in 1966, and the evolution of Black Power throughout the 70s. So it's important for us to tell our stories, and a lot of that happens in the Black church. That's why I'm so proud of Art Gordon and Reverend Cook over at St. Mark's, and Reverend Hines over at Elliott Congregation, a young cohort, a new generation of ministers who are able to connect the stories. So I'm so glad Reverend Art wasn't born when Martin Luther King was 30 years after, or something like 20 years
20
after,
years
or
after,
something,
yes.
right? But he had the opportunity.
Were you on?
I was just coming along. We're still milk.
So he was a tadpole trying. He was a tadpole trying to find a port.
And I was a toddler. He was a twinkle in his father's eye. But it's important that he was there, and I was so glad that we happened to run.
Oh my gosh,
in
all
each
three of
year.
us, because I was 15 at the time.
Yeah, and you told some important stories about your evolution and spiritual development also, which was very, very touching. I hope you tell that today.
Well, I hope so as well, but I want to hear from you in a sense, because here's the question I want to put to both of you. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a preacher, civil rights activist, he was a humanitarian, basically. Stokely Carmichael, and they coined the phrase. So there was a split in the Black community about this nonviolent approach, and then you had the Say It Loud and I'm Black and I'm Proud through James Brown, and say, what do we want? We want power. When do we want it? Now. And then you had Malcolm X on the other end saying that we need to separate ourselves. So that was a convergence of some different voices. So how do we reconcile those very important, salient differences that we had then to where we are today?
Again, I think it's about us telling our stories. In 2018, it's about people like Reverend Art understanding the sum total of what we've experienced historically, black people in this country.
We've been jacked up.
And jacked up, but there's so many moments of promise. You talk about jazz. You know,
Yeah.
I don't think you can talk about a certain type of musical idiom.
Well, blues. We can talk about the blues, the Mississippi Delta.
Memphis as well.
Yeah, well, it's all connected, but that's the genius of the black person in America, right? So it's important to tell the stories, particularly during this year. It's, as you say, salient, a salient moment in terms of telling our stories and bringing generations together. Just 3 weeks ago, on the plaza of City Hall, we had multi-generations read the words of Reverend Martin Luther King's last speech, 3,457 words. The youngest reader was 5. The oldest reader was 89. Telling our story.
This is the mountaintop speech.
This is the mountaintop speech. Dr. King's last speech. We were in Memphis on the 50th anniversary at the same place where he made that speech.
What Kevin Peterson is articulating to the listening audience, the four of us, Leonard Lee, Kevin Peterson, Reverend Art Gordon, and Darnell Williams, we had the good fortune to sit there in Mason Temple 50 years later to see where Dr. King had delivered his the mountaintop speech. We could see Bishop Blake, we can see Reverend Bernice King and Martin Luther King III, all of the speakers who spoke. We were like a stone's throw away. Reverend Eugene Rivers was right there in front of us, down in the enclave, as they would call it.
Reverend Jesse Jackson.
Reverend Jeffrey Jackson.
Ambassador
Ambassador Young spoke. And also we had the good fortune to see Eric Holder and wait a minute, Chris Tucker was there.
That's right.
Chris Tucker was in Mason Temple that night. So it was a very, very, as you say, spiritual moment for us to be able to be part of that history. What do we do with it?
We move forward.
But when you say move forward, what does that mean? Yeah, please
expound. Time to breathe. we move forward. We tell our story, and this is an important moment. So this year, for example, and you're participating in some of this Boston Mountaintop activity. Later on this year, we're going to bring leading clergy in an ecumenical fashion together to study the words of Dr. King over the next year. So we're going to create a study group among faith leaders and faith activists, civil rights activists, to try to get to some of the meaning of Dr. King's public theology. We know he had a private theology. We know he had a church theology, ecclesial theology. But he also had a public theology, which connected him to public policy, Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, housing anti-discrimination laws. If we come together as faith leaders and community leaders and civil rights leaders to read through the texts, right? Some of his texts and some stuff that was written by him. What can we devise for Boston so that Boston in 2038 looks significantly different?
That would be, to me, as I hear that, I think that has some nobility aspects to it.
Public policy.
Public policy. But Dr. King talked about the three triple evils was militarism, racism, and poverty. So if we were to fast forward 50 years, in spite of all of the progress that you've articulated, if I look at the level of poverty in this nation, it's not talking about black poverty or white poverty or brown. We're talking about poverty has stricken and children are part of that. And militarism is that's part of the issue. And then historical pundits would tell you that is when both Martin Luther King and Malcolm X connected poor people around the world is when they became the targets.
Let's look at Boston in terms of racism, military. I don't want to take too much time, but racism, military, and poverty. Look at Boston. You got militarism sort of reflected in the police department. And there are many people who would say that that's real.
Mhm.
You may deny it.
No,
You
no,
may deny it.
no, we're not denying it.
But that's real.
We'll let you breathe. We'll
Okay,
let
so
you talk.
so we're coming to what King was talking about, because I want to bring this to the micro, to the local.
Right.
So we got problems with the police department. In terms of poverty, if you're a black woman living at Blue Hill and Morton in this city, you're more likely to be poorer than anybody else across the city. More likely to have your children grow up in poverty, and more likely to send your children to schools that are underperforming. Poverty.
And your life expectancy is much significantly
That's
lower
right.
than those of Back Bay or Beacon
That's
Hill,
right.
for example.
So we can take King's grand message from 50 years ago in
And
terms
apply
of,
it.
and apply it in a very micro and local way. So there's a certain nobility about bringing these spiritual and faith leaders together. But we want to talk about what the other side of that
Yeah,
would look
'cause-
like if we focused on public policy and what the city should look like in 2038.
I think that this is the conversation that we're having, brethren, that really gives us where the spirituality
That's right.
and our wisdom and our insights are leading where it will become practically good to change the outcomes for our people.
Mhm.
Now, we talked about Mason Temple. Talk about, if you will, when we went to the National Museum of Civil Rights. And on one side of the street where if those of you who've never been to Memphis, this was my first time after 50 years. I'd never been to Memphis. But on the side of the street where you can actually go into the hotel through the tunnel, and you can see the room allegedly where Lee Harvey Oswald made the shot. The bathroom, the hallway, the bathroom window where the shot was taken. And then you go across the street to room 306 at the Lorraine Motel. You can see both rooms. I think, Kevin, I remember a conversation with you. You actually had a chance to go inside the room. They had a glass there now. You can take a room, or in the balcony, you can take a picture. So talk about what that meant to be at not only where Lee Harvey Oswald was, but also where the room where Dr. King, in the balcony where Reverend Jesse Jackson and them were pointing to the hotel across the street.
You know, as I mentioned earlier, it was a spiritual moment.
Mhm.
Within a stone's throw from each other, you saw love and hate within the same space.
Oh, right.
You saw justice and injustice in the same space. And that one space reminds us of how close these things are together. The same amount of people we have working for justice, you've got even more working for injustice. You've got a small group, for example, if I can make it local, in Boston, who are pushing for things like affordable housing, but you've got a lot of other people who are all supporting major developments that are pushing people out of their neighborhoods.
Preach
And
that.
you can use that in so many different of the issues that we're dealing with. And it says that as a minority, standing and fighting for social justice, that we've got to bring
That's right.
all these groups of people together. And one of the things I kind of wanted to touch on, and I'm slightly diving off, is we talked about, telling those stories and bridging the gap. But there's also a divide between generations. And as a young pastor, I see a lot of it because my generation, by and large, is upset with the church. When you look at cases like Ferguson, for example, a lot of the African Americans there who were poor, queer, black women, single mother, when that incident happened, the church never showed up and never opened its doors until the cameras came around. And I got a chance to even be at that event, and it reminded me of the work we have to do. When people like Jamal Bryant just flew in from Baltimore to give a speech, he got booed out of the place. When Reverend Jesse Jackson showed up, he got booed out of the place because the people of my
Sharpton got booed out of there as well.
he got booed out as well because people my generation were seeing, here these guys are coming to give a speech and go on. When the real work, the real pain, and the real hurt is by the people who aren't being seen.
Is that an appropriate response for the generation to boo the folks who've been on the front line for them? And I understand it, but I'm just asking the question because I marched down there with Trayvon Martin.
I don't know if it's appropriate, but I can understand why.
Okay.
When these are the people we've looked to be the help, to be the change, and what they have become for many people in my generation are opportunists
Okay.
who only show up at certain cases.
And that is the thing that we have to deal with, because sometimes we just don't know all of the facts, or we don't know. But their reactions is real, because they're saying that you're not representing us. Whatever it is that you're doing, I may not be aware of, but at the end of the day, the results are not matching up to what we need to get to happen.
And it's the
Is
same
that
with,
what you're saying?
churches locally as well. You know, a lot of people my generation across the country are having this kind of broken friction with the church and with pastors. And as a pastor in Boston, I hear it all the time about those who come before me, and how there's a lack. When I walk around, Dudley, I hear about the distrust of regular, everyday folks with pastors, with faith leaders.
Well, I think there's a distrust with pastors, there's a distrust with local leaders, elected officials. So it's a whole gamut.
It is.
And so, but this is why I raised the question to Kevin earlier by saying, are we as high occupiers of the high moral ground of where we were back in 1955 and 64 and 63, when the 4 little girls and the 3 civil rights workers, the list goes on and on in terms of white minister from here in Boston getting killed trying to register people to vote. And so there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that was shed. And yet when we come to the day, people saying, well, I don't trust. Well, who do you trust?
That's a good question.
Who do you trust?
Well, we got to trust each other, because there's no alternative, right? If we want to make
I'm not beating us up. I'm just asking the question, because these are the
Mhm.
questions when
But
you're
I
by
think
yourself, you don't have an answer.
But I think we also need to have a very, and this is the importance, and I don't want to be
Sure.
repetitive, but the importance of telling the story.
Right.
As great as the Montgomery campaign was, and how massive and how unified it was, those victories across the span of the civil rights movement were won by a minority of folks. Only 10% of the people, this is a statistic, of black people actively involved themselves in marching or boycotting during the course of the civil rights movement. 10%. The small minority doing the right thing, and they had the support of the lion's share of the African American community, Negroes back then, behind them.
But the 10% were the act.
They were active. You think about the bloody Sunday. Dr. King wasn't there. There were about 400 people who were attempting to march across the bridge. There were about 2,000 black people across Selma. In general, most of them went to church instead. Small minority of people. So I understand the frustration that Art's generation can hear and see, but to know the stories is to know that that some of the victories, a great deal of the victories in terms of what was won for our community, were won by small minority of people. Sometimes they were it meant Dr. King dropping in for a sound bath to Memphis, right? So sometimes that stuff can be in fact. Sometimes it means that Louis Farrakhan just has to drop in Boston for a right. So we need to tell the stories, appreciate the stories, and put them in context.
Right.
I understand the frustration, because that boy.
I get frustrated as
Yeah,
well.
'cause that
So I
boy-
don't think it's just a young generation, if I may add. I think but God works in mysterious ways with us. He will take us through various experiences in order that you will be used for some specific assignment that you have no knowledge of. And so as a people, we're going through these changes. We thought that we had arrived. Everything that we asked for in the 60s, we thought that we got. I'm here to tell you I've been living through all of that. We got everything we asked for, but nothing what we needed. If that makes any sense.
No, it does. That's why I like the message that's coming out of the black churches these days about what Trump means to the black community.
Right. I've been preaching a lot about that.
Opportunity.
Okay.
Opportunity. Because there is, I don't want to call him Pharaoh, but there is a certain kind of Pharaoh who's oppressing people, denigrating people, making life worse for people after we thought that we had.
I think the scripture says there came a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph.
There is, that's right, yeah. But to your point, sometimes God does work in a mysterious way.
He really does.
And there's a voice, there's a prophetic voice being raised within our black churches these days, right? That speaks to We haven't reached the promised land yet, and we have a Pharaoh, symbolically, to respond to. And what does that mean? I think I don't think there is a disconnection between Donald Trump and the wild sort of capitalism that he promotes, and what happened in Starbucks.
We're gonna have a lengthier. We're gonna have to have a lengthier conversation.
We're gonna talk about Trumpism. I preach about that all the time.
Well, Trumpism is not the issue, but the Pharaohism, I think I'm gonna have to.
That's Trumpism.
Okay.
That's Trumpism. And all the stuff included in that. It's a broad term.
You said we wanted to have church, right?
No, anytime the three of us get together, it says, when 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I will be in the midst of you. I think that's what it says. And so, but I think that the thing is that what we want to have for our listening audience is that as a result of us going to Memphis, as a result of us reflecting on Martin Luther King's legacy, how is it that I think that the further we get away from his assassination, that we have people who are trying to manufacture his image into something that is not connected to his, as you call it, his theology, or his changing the dynamics or shifting the power dynamics in economic inequality. Would you speak to that?
Many times we have to change the narrative about what we believe about Dr. King. We love to reduce him to one speech or part of a speech or the nice part about him. But we forget to realize that the last few years of his life, he had become more radical. He started talking more about economics and poverty. And I think a lot of times we just like to reduce him to this nice guy who ended up dying for sort of the sins of America. And I think we have to remind, as Kevin said, telling those stories and reminding people, as Dr. Cornel West said, that there was a radical king.
Yeah, it was.
A very radical
Absolutely.
one who talked about radical issues that were so radical that most of that kind of talk couldn't even come in the black church.
But then the thing is that you have to think about the times in which he spoke. That was a boldness about him that really that seems to get escaped. It's not about that I have a dream speech. I mean, I love it.
I can't think of anybody else in the nation right now who exhibited the kind of courage that he was exhibiting in
Bold
his time.
courage.
Wow. You
In
think
the
about that?
context.
And that's what frustrated me during MLK 50 when you heard some people get a chance to speak who were strongly Republican. Their legislation, their political views are the exact opposite of Dr. King, yet they were on the stage talking about this is what we need to do to continue his legacy. But my thing is, but you're cutting housing. You're trying to cut health care.
Well, let me give you
You're
guys
underfunding some schools.
I'm gonna give you guys a real page from back in the day when I was a kid in the church during that time. Most of the preachers in America were talking about Dr. King needs to get out of politics.
That's right.
He needs to get in and stay in the church and stay in the pulpit. As soon as Dr. King got killed, I had the privilege and I had the honor to march
to
with
walk
Dr.
with
King
him and talk to him.
with him, and we broke bread together and all of that. I said,
He's
man,
my
come
children's
on, man.
godparent.
I
You hear all that
know,
from everybody.
Everybody, they flipped the script when
Everybody
they
flipped the script.
realized that it was convenient now. But before that, when he fell out with LBJ talking about we don't need to be in the Vietnam War, he came out against him. LBJ thought that he got betrayed by Dr. King. So there was a whole lot of nuances. Now, I might have been 15, but I wasn't stupid. Because you could listen and you can hear, you can observe. So now it's convenient to go to these breakfasts and lunches that are in Dr. King. But what are you really doing? Change that young female head of household to get a job and not have the draconian measures that keep her trapped in poverty and those kids that will be destined to be poor when they grow up.
Exactly. And that's why I had to agree with Cornel West when he was angered that Barack Obama would, swear on Martin Luther King's Bible, because Dr. West was saying that's a huge statement to make. That means if you're going to swear on Dr. King's Bible, that means you're going to try to live up to what he was doing. And I'm not here to criticize Barack Obama or anything, but I can understand why Dr. West
That's like trying to criticize Beyonce. It's not a good thing to do.
Exactly. But to my point, there are a lot of politicians, particularly those who are moderate and those who are Republican, who love to keep going to these breakfasts. They love to keep going to these King speeches and do all this fancy talk about King. But I can guarantee you none of their policies, none of their legislations, none of their ideologies would be something that King would even stand for. In fact, I argue that the majority of it is antithetical to the message of Dr. King.
And that's the kind of conversation we need to be having, Kevin. That's the reason why I push back on you, because I'm saying my thing, and I don't have all the answers. I just know that I lived through that. I know where I was when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. I know where I was when Martin Luther King was assassinated. I know where I was when Emmett Till, et cetera, or when there's another person, Bobby Kennedy was there, or Medgar Evers, or the 4 little girls in the 16th Street Baptist Church went to those churches. When the folks who would get killed in South Carolina by the person coming to Bible study.
Exactly.
I went to that funeral because I knew one of the persons that actually got killed in that service. So it's like, this stuff is so personally real.
Yes, it is.
And therefore, so I don't have time to play games. I don't really don't.
None of us. None of us. It's all serious. It's all serious. And you know, Tip O'Neill, one of our patriot political saints,
That's right.
says all politics is local. All progressive struggle towards justice is local. So King provides for me in Boston for 2018. Should provide a template for all of us to say this is what he said. Wasn't a perfect man. We don't necessarily have to agree with.
None of us are perfect,
right? And we don't necessarily have to agree with the corpus of his theology, right? But he said some things that are important. You raised them: the militarism, poverty, and racism, right? So how do we take a local?
It hasn't changed. Those things still applicable.
So how do we take a local look at what's happening here in Boston? Look at the symbolic violence that Faneuil Hall represents to people. If you take, if I had a granddaughter and I had to explain the story of that building, I would be ashamed. I think you would be too.
I think,
right?
But
People who are in positions of power, white and black people, should understand that we got to tell stories to our children. And when we take our children to that building, it symbolizes the epitome of racism. A young slave was sold in order to build that building.
Or Harvard, or Brown University, or the other Ivy Leagues as well. Tell that story.
Or other. And then you get to, so that's just on the symbolic level. If we go with that, then that's only symbolism. But it's important. But we also got to talk about economic disparity in Boston based on race. We got to talk about education disparity based on race. And it's all shameful. We got to go. I know you've been doing a great.
I would talk about the housing and home ownership,
so much.
Transfer of wealth, So if you guys are going to be talking about Trumpism, and what was the other word that you used for it? In terms of Trumpism, you said Pharaohism.
Pharaoh.
I think we have to
kind
talk
of Pharaoh,
kind of Pharaoh, whatever. We got to talk about how we, as a people, collectively are permanently trapped as these consumers.
Yeah.
That we spend $1.3 trillion on an annual basis, but what do we have to show for it?
Well, it's the beauty of some of the work that you're doing, and the National Urban League. We cannot discount the progress that's been made. We just got to do more. So the Urban League, and not because I'm on your show, has been doing a tremendous job in Boston in terms of indicating where there are opportunities for businesses and individual and familial opportunity.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I think that we're doing. I consider the Urban League as an assignment that God put me into. I made the connection, and I want to come back to you guys momentarily, is because for the first time in my life, when I got to Memphis, I had finally stitched together that I made a prayer to God the night that Dr. King was assassinated. And I said, God, send me and use me as an instrument that I would speak for your downtrodden people. And 50 years later, he brought me to Memphis and reminded me, through all of my work with the NAACP, all of the work that I've done in civil rights, that I made the connection back 50 years later to that prayer. And so it really, I was up all night. I cried because I had forgot all about it. But yet my whole life was designed about what I prayed and asked for, and God answered my prayer. And so I think that all of our lives intertwine are connected to that Memphis trip. And so we will forever be cemented because of that experience.
Amen.
Now, what would be your historical connection to that? Yeah, even though that you said that you were 20 years later, but you identified with it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I identify with it because the work that Dr. King was doing is the work that I'm trying to do, and the work that many other people are trying to do at the same time through a number of different reasons. This generation does not have sort of zeitgeist, Dr. King kind of person. We have William Barber, who would be probably the closest to it.
Right. He's a powerful brother. I served with him when I was in the NAACP, so I know him quite well. Reverend
But there are a lot of different groups and a lot of different people working for really the same mission in a number of different ways.
But it wasn't. He was in Mason Temple too with us. He was sitting down. He was sitting down there on the left.
Mm-hmm.
They acknowledged him from the pulpit.
For me, one, my father died a year before Barack Obama was elected. 2 years. Barack Obama just started the campaign. He said, Kevin, it will never happen. It will never happen.
None of us thought it would happen.
Exactly.
He wasn't alone.
There was some kind of uptick in terms of optimism about it, but he was saying, no, never going to happen. I'm so glad that it did happen. Because one of the stories that my father tells me, growing up in Georgetown, South Carolina, was that he came into his consciousness about 12, 13 years old, and remember being told to get off the street as the white person was walking down the street. Wanted to order Coca-Cola, but said, black people don't drink Coke in this town. You got to drink Pepsi or orange soda. So part of the story for Memphis 50 for me is just thinking about how far we've come, and how far we have to go, and just being optimistic. Optimistic, probably not the best word. Hopeful.
Hopeful. I would consider us as prisoners of hope.
That's right.
That's what we are, and I think that was a Cornel West quote. But I would have to say, in respect to Barack Obama, I would have to go back and pay homage to Shirley Chisholm.
Oh, yeah.
The two campaigns of 1984 and 88 for Reverend Jesse Jackson. Even Al Sharpton ran for president. All of them laid the way for a Barack Obama, because I was on the elevator, Barack, when he was just a U.S. Senator. And he said to me, Darnell, lightning does not strike twice in the same spot. So yes, I am going to run. So that was the very last time that I was on the elevator with him by myself.
May not have to get up.
But you get my point, is that, you know, there are things that happen in your life, and they happen for a reason, that you're able to encounter people and encounter events that shape who you are and where you are going to take. So basically, if we were to take this conversation, our MLK 50, the listening to Branch Taylor, who's written seminal work around Dr. King. Eric Holder was the keynote speaker at one of the luncheons that were there. So it was a very, very powerful collection of voices dealing with voting rights, civil rights, human rights, and where do we go from here? So we're not going to chaos, so where do we go, Kevin?
To the future with hope and faith and a commitment towards unity. I mean, part of King's practice was his public theology. Again, he had an eye towards what was happening in communities, whether it was Selma or Chicago or Montgomery or even Boston. So we need to, in Boston, be embracing what we must be focusing on for the next generation.
Let me say this to you. I think one of the groups that we have not acknowledged, and I want to make sure, if I go back to Birmingham, when there was a calculated decision on the civil rights leaders to put the children on the front line, I think that we need to make sure that we acknowledge the children in this conversation, because Bull Connor was quoted as saying, we don't want to hear about the law. Down here, we make the law. And so he had no concerns about what the national laws were. And so when they made this calculated decision to put the children on the front line, Bull Connor turned those dogs and those water hoses on those children. And then people who saw those images on television were outraged that this is how we would treat another American, regardless of what. And these were not just, these were kids. These were kids. And so that image was seared into America's conscience, looking at those little black and white televisions back in the day that really changed and helped change. So we have a tendency to talk about the Martin Luther King and the Reverend Abernathy's, the Reverend Jack T, Andrew Young, all of the other leaders, the Bayard Rustin, all of those guys that were very much, A. Philip Randolph and Whitney Young and Roy Wilkins. These were, and I forgot, I got to talk about another person whose name is going to come to me in a minute, but there are many other players. Dorothy Height, that's what
Dorothy Height.
Dorothy Irene Height was also part of this group of people who were leading the effort. But these kids, what would you say about those kids then and now?
I would say, one, they're brave, and I also say that it takes them as well. That this fight is not a black male fight, it's not a black female fight, that this is a fight for all kinds of people, as Ralph Abernathy said, who loves justice-loving people. And so you're reminded that even kids, young children, have a passion for social justice. And you see it in their schoolwork, you see it in their art. Now, obviously, because of their age and they don't have a job, there's some things they can't do, but we also have to realize that they are our assets as well. We have children today in the city of Boston who have to walk past gangs just to get to school. They have to go to school with metal detectors and be in schools with some that are failing and are underfunded, but yet they still stand for justice, yet they still fight for justice, yet they still show even old folks how to love folks and how to treat folks right.
They have the energy. We may have some experiences. For example, their response to the gun violence in this nature, and what they did in the nation, what they did here in Boston. It was young people.
Right.
And they told, I think the example was that all of the old people were told, y'all go to the back of the room, and they told all the young people to come up front.
Yeah, there was a congressman, I think he's a former congressman in Georgia, who was on an interview saying, look, these kids are 17 years old. This isn't going to last. And their response is, you better watch this, because we're not going to let anybody, a former congressman, an older person, anybody, like civil rights movement, turn us around.
That's right.
If we've got to do it, if we've got to say gun policy is something we need to be concerned about, that we need to get the guns out the streets and out the classrooms, and that we need our school classrooms to be safe. If the young children have to do it, then we'll have to do it if we've got to do it all by ourselves.
Our job is to follow them, support them, encourage them, and guide them.
Exactly.
If you had some parting words, Reverend, you're listening to 97.7 Community Focused Program. The Reverend Art Gordon, pastor of St. John's Missionary Baptist Church, Kevin Peterson from the New Democracy Coalition, and I'm your host, Darnell Williams. If you had some parting words of inspiration and hope as a prisoner of hope, what would you say to our listening audience this morning?
I would say to them, continue to fight for justice and continue to work in solidarity. And as a pastor, I believe that can be done. The scripture says, let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. And we all play a role in that. And finally, the last thing I would say is that, as Dr. King and many others have said, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And whatever you do, whatever you call to do, bend the arc towards justice, bend the arc towards freedom, bend the arc towards love, bend the arc towards hope, bend the arc towards forgiveness, bend the arc towards reconciliation, and you keep bending and pressing as much as you can, and let God do the rest.
Darnell Williams will have the final word here, and I would say I'm like the two men who prayed to God, and one talked about, God, I give my tithes every day, I pray 3 times a day, I have a lot of worldly goods, and I do all the things that you've asked me to do in the Word, in the Scripture, and I know that I'm a righteous man. And then the second man said, Lord, I'm a sinner. I don't even have the ability to look up to heaven to even ask you for something. But I'm asking you this morning to forgive me and give me strength, that I might be able to be changed, that you might use me as your instrument of thy grace. So this morning on 97.7, we're sending out a message to you. You're not alone. God is with us, and he's with us as a people.
Yes.
Go in God's grace. Be with you.
Amen.
wrap, Doc?
Amen.
That's a wrap?
That's a wrap.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Darnell. Thank you.